The breaking point. Commander Maya Patel stood motionless in her containment field, watching the crystalline beings slide past her cell. Their faceted bodies caught the harsh light of the detention center, fracturing it into rainbow patterns that danced across the sterile white walls. The Voidborn, as they called themselves, moved with an unsettling geometric precision that made organic life forms appear chaotic by comparison. Specimen continues to display excessive emotional responses. One of her captors noted, its voice a symphony of chiming tones. Elevated heart rate indicates fear or anger. Maya allowed herself a small smile, knowing they would interpret it as another emotional weakness. The Voidborn had evolved from silicon-based life forms, developing crystalline neural networks that they believed made them superior to unstable organic beings. They saw emotions as evolutionary flaws, something to be purged from the galaxy. They had captured her 3 weeks ago during what was supposed to be a diplomatic mission to their home system. Maya had been chosen specifically because of her background in xenobiology and her track record of successful first contact scenarios. The Voidborn had other plans. Instead of negotiations, they saw an opportunity to study human emotional responses and prove their own superiority. Your species relies too heavily on chemical reactions to process information, another Voidborn observed, its crystalline form shifting through various geometric configurations. These emotions cloud your judgment, make you inefficient. Maya focused on keeping her breathing steady, using the meditation techniques she'd learned during her diplomatic training. But she wasn't trying to suppress her emotions. She was cataloging everything she observed. The way the Voidborn's crystalline bodies resonated when they spoke, the slight variations in their harmonic frequencies when they moved, the almost imperceptible vibrations that ran through the facility's structure. The isolation cell they kept her in was designed to be psychologically devastating. No human contact, no day-night cycle, just the constant presence of beings who viewed her very nature as a flaw to be corrected. But they didn't understand what isolation meant to a human who had been trained to turn inward, to use solitude as a tool for deeper understanding. Each day, they subjected her to what they called emotional purification, a process designed to break down her psychological defenses and prove the superiority of their purely logical existence. They never noticed how carefully she listened to the resonant frequencies they used, how she tested different vocal pitches during their sessions, observing how sound waves interacted with their crystalline forms. "Your resistance is illogical," the lead researcher declared during one session. "We offer perfection, freedom from the chaos of emotional responses, yet you cling to your flawed state." Maya met its faceted sensory cluster with steady eyes. "Perhaps," she replied carefully, modulating her voice to test another frequency, "you're not seeing the whole picture." The slight tremor that ran through the researcher's form confirmed her growing theory. At night, or what she assumed was night, Maya lay on her bed and pieced together everything she'd learned. The Voidborn weren't just crystalline in appearance. Their entire consciousness resided in complex lattices of living crystal. These structures were incredibly stable, allowing for vast computational power and perfect logic. But like any crystal, they had resonant frequencies. Hit the right note, and even the strongest crystal could shatter. She began humming softly to herself, precisely measuring each note's pitch and duration. The Voidborn dismissed it as another emotional coping mechanism, never realizing she was methodically mapping out their structural vulnerabilities. They believed they were studying her, but Maya was conducting an investigation of her own. The other prisoners noticed the change in her first. Through the subtle networks of communication that always develop in prisons, they saw how the supposedly broken human diplomat carried herself with quiet purpose. Species that had been enemies found themselves working together, passing messages in clicks, taps, and whispers. Maya wasn't just mapping frequencies. She was building an army. Emotional instability appears to be decreasing. She overheard one guard report. "Subject shows signs of accepting logical supremacy." Maya continued her soft humming, feeling the subtle vibrations travel through the facility's crystalline architecture. The Voidborn had built their entire civilization on the premise of emotional suppression being the path to perfection. They never considered that emotions themselves might be a form of evolutionary intelligence, that the very chaos they despised might be the key to their undoing. As she refined her understanding of their resonant frequencies, Maya reflected on the irony of their situation. The Voidborn sought to prove the superiority of pure logic by breaking her spirit. Instead, they had given her the time, tools, and motivation to understand them more deeply than any previous species. Their perfect prison was about to become the laboratory of their own transformation. Tomorrow's purification session will be decisive, the lead researcher announced, its crystalline form gleaming with cold certainty. We will demonstrate once and for all the futility of emotional resistance. Maya nodded compliantly, but in her mind, she was already composing the symphony that would shake their world to its foundations. The Voidborn had wanted to study human emotional responses. They were about to learn that human ingenuity, powered by the very emotions they despised, could reshape the very structure of their reality. Crystal clear. The first crack appeared during Maya's 15th purification session. It was microscopic, a tiny fissure in the crystalline surface of her primary interrogator, barely visible under the harsh lights of the chamber. But to Maya, it was confirmation of everything she'd theorized during her weeks of captivity. Your neural patterns show increasing stability, the interrogator chimed, unaware of the imperfection spreading through its lattice structure. Perhaps you begin to understand the superiority of pure logic. Maya modulated her voice carefully as she replied, matching the resonant frequency she'd discovered. Understanding comes in many forms. The crack expanded by a fraction of a millimeter. The Voidborn's crystalline architecture was responding exactly as she'd predicted. Among the observation team, a junior researcher designated Facet 9 shifted uncomfortably. Unlike its colleagues, it had begun to notice subtle patterns in the human's behavior that didn't align with their models of emotional degradation. The way she chose her words, the precise timing of her responses, the careful control of her vocal patterns, all suggested a level of calculation that should have been impossible for an emotion-driven being. Subjects' responses appear increasingly organized. Facet 9 noted in its report, recommend additional analysis of human cognitive capabilities. The suggestion earned it immediate censure from its superiors. Your observation indicates emotional contamination, the lead researcher declared. Report for purification immediately. But as Facet 9 underwent its own purification, it couldn't shake the lingering doubt. The human prisoner wasn't breaking down. She was adapting. More disturbing still, she seemed to be understanding the Voidborn in ways they had never understood themselves. Maya watched the exchange with carefully concealed interest. She had noticed Facet 9's different behavioral patterns, the way its crystalline form exhibited slightly more flexibility than its peers. It wasn't the only one. Throughout the facility, certain Voidborn were beginning to show microscopic variations in their crystal structures, tiny adaptations that their rigid society viewed as flaws, but that Maya recognized as evolution in action. During her daily exercise period, a concession granted to maintain her physical form for study, Maya began incorporating specific movements that generated subtle vibrations through the facility's crystal-based architecture. The guards dismissed it as primitive human calisthenics, never noticing how the frequencies slowly resonated through their own bodies, creating nearly imperceptible changes in their structural integrity. Specimen maintains physical activity despite emotional suppression, one guard observed to another. Persistence appears illogical. Perhaps, its companion responded, its voice carrying an unusual harmonic undertone. There are aspects of human behavior we do not yet comprehend. The second guard was immediately reported for emotional contamination, but the seed of doubt had been planted. Throughout the facility, more Voidborn were beginning to experience what they considered malfunctions, subtle shifts in their crystal matrices that allowed for more complex thought patterns. Maya's influence spread beyond just the Voidborn. Other prisoners began mimicking her exercises, creating a complex network of resonant frequencies that traveled through the crystalline walls of their cells. Species that had never been able to communicate before found themselves linked by the subtle vibrations, sharing information and hope. The human's presence is causing unprecedented disruption, the facility commander reported to the Voidborn High Council. Multiple instances of structural instability have been reported among staff. The council's response was immediate and severe. Maya was to be terminated immediately. The risk of emotional contamination was too great to allow her continued existence, but they had waited too long. The changes they feared were already spreading through their society, carried by the very frequencies Maya had discovered. Facet 9, now marked as deviant and awaiting recycling, made a decision that would have been impossible before its exposure to human unpredictability. During its final maintenance duty, it adjusted the frequency of Maya's containment field, creating a microscopic fluctuation in the energy pattern. Maya felt the change instantly. The barrier's resonant frequency was now perfectly aligned with the tone she'd been practicing for weeks. With precise control, she began to hum, not the random emotional expression the Voidborn expected, but a carefully calculated note that matched the containment field's fundamental frequency. The barrier's crystal matrix began to vibrate in sympathy with her voice. Across the facility, other crystals picked up the resonance, creating a cascading harmony of frequencies. The Voidborn guards closest to her cell were the first to feel it, a deep structural tremor that threatened the very integrity of their forms. Emergency protocol initiated. The facility AI announced its crystalline processors already affected by the spreading resonance. Unknown harmonic disruption detected. But Maya knew it wasn't unknown. She had spent weeks mapping every frequency, understanding every resonance pattern. The Voidborn had given her the perfect laboratory to study their weaknesses, and now she was about to show them exactly how dangerous an emotional, adaptable being could be. As alarms began to sound throughout the facility, Maya allowed herself a genuine smile. The Voidborn were about to learn that their perfect crystalline order was no match for the chaos of human ingenuity. The real question was whether they would shatter completely or learn to adapt, to embrace the very flexibility they had spent millennia trying to suppress. Ripples of resistance. The revolution began not with a bang, but with a harmony. As Maya's precisely calculated frequencies rippled through the detention facility, they created something the Voidborn had never encountered in their millennia of existence, a symphony of chaos that followed its own complex order. The first to join were the Myrians, aquatic beings whose natural sonar capabilities allowed them to amplify and redirect Maya's resonant frequencies. In their cells, they began to pulse their bioluminescent organs in synchronized patterns, adding new layers to the harmonic assault on the facility's crystalline structure. Multiple anomalies detected in sectors 7 through 13, the facility AI reported, its voice carrying unusual distortions. Crystal matrix integrity compromised in primary security nodes. The Voidborn response team moved through the corridors with military precision, their crystalline forms refracting emergency lights in dazzling patterns. But with each step, they felt the vibrations growing stronger, creating micro-fissures in their perfectly ordered lattices. Thoughts they had never experienced before began to surface. Doubt, uncertainty, and most disturbing of all, curiosity. Facet 9, now freed from its containment cell by the failing security systems, made its way toward Maya's position. Its crystalline form had changed noticeably, developing organic-looking swirls and patterns that would have been considered abominations in Voidborn society just days ago. But these imperfections gave it something its people had never possessed: flexibility, both physical and mental. The harmony spreads. It communicated to Maya through the vibrations in the walls. Many are changing. Many are afraid. Maya modulated her humming slightly, incorporating a gentler resonance that wouldn't shatter the crystalline beings, but would continue to encourage their transformation. Fear is natural, she responded, her voice carrying through the facility's crystal matrix. It means they're growing. Throughout the prison complex, other species began adding their own voices to the resonant cascade. The insectoid trilca clicked their mandibles in precise rhythms. The gaseous vorethi expanded and contracted their cloud-like forms to create pressure waves. Even the silicum-based quarks, distant evolutionary cousins to the voidborn, contributed by modulating their natural electromagnetic fields. The Voidborn High Council, monitoring the situation from their capital city, watched in horror as the infection of chaos spread beyond the prison's boundaries. Reports flooded in from across their territory. Crystalline beings developing irregular patterns, questioning established protocols, exhibiting signs of emotional response. "This is unprecedented," the council leader declared, its perfect geometric form showing the first signs of asymmetry. "The human's influence threatens the very foundation of our society." But it was already too late to contain the change. The frequencies Maya had discovered weren't just affecting physical structures. They were awakening something that had been dormant in the Voidborn for countless generations. The capacity for change, for adaptation, for emotional understanding had always been present in their crystalline matrices. It had simply been suppressed by their rigid adherence to pure logic. In the prison's control center, the facility commander watched its own form begin to change, developing patterns that mimicked the flowing movements of organic life. "We were wrong," it realized, its voice carrying new harmonics. "Complexity does not equal chaos. Order can exist within flexibility." The revelation spread through the Voidborn, ranks like a shockwave. Guards looked at their prisoners with new understanding, seeing not inferior emotional beings, but different forms of consciousness, each with their own unique strengths. The very diversity they had sought to eliminate now revealed itself as a source of incredible potential. Maya continued to modulate her frequencies, working with the other prisoners to guide the transformation. They weren't seeking to destroy the Voidborn, but to help them evolve. Each new harmony added to the complex pattern strengthened the bridge between crystalline logic and organic emotion. "Your species," Facet 9 observed as it helped coordinate the peaceful surrender of the remaining hardline guards, "possessed the capability to shatter us completely. Yet you chose a more difficult path. Why?" Maya's response carried through the facility's crystal matrices, reaching every being within. "Because true strength isn't about destroying what's different. It's about finding the harmony in diversity. Your people tried to prove their superiority by eliminating emotion. We're showing you that real advancement comes from integration, not elimination." As the prison's systems continued to evolve under the influence of the harmonic revolution, messages began arriving from across Voidborn space. The change was spreading, carried by the very communication networks they had built to maintain their perfect order. In cities, colonies, and outposts, crystalline beings were experiencing their first tastes of emotional awareness and discovering that it didn't lead to the chaos they had feared. The Voidborn's great experiment in emotional suppression had backfired spectacularly. In trying to prove the superiority of pure logic, they had instead discovered its limitations, and in their perfectly ordered prison, they had given a human diplomat exactly what she needed to teach them that lesson: time, motivation, and a crystal-clear understanding of their true nature. Frequency of freedom. The Voidborn High Council's emergency session was interrupted by a sound they had never heard before: laughter. It echoed through their crystalline chamber, not as a sign of derision or mockery, but as pure expression of joy. The source was one of their own, a junior council member whose form had begun to display swirling, organic patterns. "Don't you see?" The council member chimed, its voice carrying complex harmonics that would have been considered corrupt just days ago. "We sought perfection in rigidity, but true perfection lies in adaptation." Outside the council chamber, the capital city was transforming. The once perfect geometric structures began to develop subtle curves and asymmetries, reflecting the changing consciousness of their inhabitants. The revolution that had started in a prison cell had become a metamorphosis of an entire civilization. Maya, now free from her cell, stood in the facility's central control room with Facet 9 and representatives from each imprisoned species. The room's crystalline displays showed similar changes spreading across voidborn space, but not everyone welcomed the transformation. Radical elements are mobilizing, Facet 9 reported, its form shifting with concern. The traditional order believes this change will destroy our civilization. They're preparing to sterilize affected regions with resonance weapons. Maya's expression remained calm, but her mind raced with calculations. The traditional order's weapons would work on the same principles she had discovered, but instead of encouraging transformation, they would shatter the crystal matrices of any voidborn showing signs of change. "They don't understand," she said, modulating her voice to carry through the facility's crystal network. "They're not losing their civilization. They're achieving its next evolution." The Mirian's ambassador, a being of flowing water and bioluminescence, pulsed in agreement. "Our species faced a similar crisis when we first developed emotional awareness. The transition is always difficult." Through the crystalline communications network, they could see the traditional order's forces mobilizing. Their ships, perfect geometric forms of living crystal, moved into attack positions around affected colonies, but they had underestimated how far the change had already spread. Maya worked quickly with her allies, both former prisoners and transformed voidborn, to develop a countermeasure. If the traditional order would use resonance as a weapon, they would use it as a shield, and more. "We need to broadcast on all frequencies," she instructed, her voice carrying the precise harmonics needed to interface with voidborn technology, not to attack, but to reveal. The plan came together with the cooperation of all species present. The Mirians contributed their understanding of harmonic amplification. The Vorathi provided insight into wave propagation through different mediums. The Quarks offered their mastery of electromagnetic field manipulation. Even the Trilka, traditionally isolationist, shared their knowledge of biological resonance patterns. As the traditional order's ships prepared to fire their weapons, Maya initiated the broadcast. But instead of a single frequency, they transmitted the complete harmonic spectrum of life itself. From the subtle vibrations of crystal formation to the complex rhythms of organic hearts. The effect was immediate and profound. The traditional order's weapons, designed to enforce crystalline purity, instead became conduits for the full spectrum of existence. Their crews experienced something unprecedented, a direct sensation of life in all its beautiful, chaotic complexity. "This is what you've been fighting." Maya's voice carried through the resonant network. "Not disorder, but the next step in your evolution. The missing frequencies in your crystalline song." Ship by ship, the traditional order's fleet stood down as their crews underwent the same transformation that had begun in Maya's prison cell. The rigid geometric patterns of their vessels began to flow and shift, incorporating organic curves while maintaining their fundamental structure. In the High Council chamber, the leader's crystalline form had developed patterns that mimicked the spiral of galaxies. "We thought we had achieved perfection." It broadcast across all frequencies. "But we had only achieved stagnation. In trying to contain the universe's chaos, we contained our own potential." The revolution ended not with the destruction of voidborn civilization, but with its rebirth. The perfect crystalline beings who had sought to purge emotion from the galaxy discovered that their very structure could accommodate both logic and feeling, order and chaos, permanence and change. Maya stood with Facet 9, watching through the facility's displays as the transformation spread. Across voidborn space, crystalline cities began to pulse with new life, their structures flowing like frozen music made visible. The beings who had once been her captors were becoming something entirely new, a species that could bridge the gap between organic and crystalline life. "What happens now?" Facet 9 asked, its form shimmering with what Maya recognized as hope, an emotion no voidborn had experienced before this day. "Now," Maya replied, her voice carrying harmonics that made the crystals around them sing, "we learn from each other. Your people have much to teach us about logic and permanence. We have much to share about adaptation and emotion. Together, we'll find new frequencies of existence." The prison that had been built to suppress emotion became the first embassy of a new age, a place where crystalline and organic beings could meet to explore the full spectrum of consciousness. The Voidborn's great experiment in emotional purification had failed, but in its failure, they had achieved something far greater than their original goal. They had discovered that true perfection lies not in the elimination of difference, but in the harmony of diversity, harmony of understanding. 5 years after the events that transformed Voidborn civilization, Commander Maya Patel stood before the newly constructed Harmonic Assembly, a vast structure that merged crystalline precision with organic fluidity. The building itself was a testament to the changes that had swept through both societies, its surfaces constantly shifting in response to the emotions and thoughts of those within. The integration continues to exceed all projections, Maya reported to the assembled representatives of both human and Voidborn worlds. Her voice carried through the crystal-enhanced acoustics, each word creating ripples of resonant meaning that both species could understand. What began as a prison breakthrough has become a breakthrough in consciousness itself. Beside her stood Facet 9, now the leader of the Voidborn's Evolution Council. Its crystalline form had developed into something unprecedented, a perfect fusion of geometric precision and organic adaptability. The patterns that had once been considered flaws were now recognized as the physical manifestation of emotional growth. Our studies of human neural patterns once focused on eliminating what we perceived as chaos. Facet 9 addressed the assembly, its form shifting with subtle emotions that would have been unthinkable in the old regime. Now we understand that this very adaptability is what we needed to transcend our own limitations. The changes had rippled far beyond the original prison facility, which had been transformed into the galaxy's premier center for consciousness research. Teams of human scientists worked alongside Voidborn researchers, exploring the full spectrum of sentient experience. The crystalline being's perfect memory and computational abilities, now enhanced by emotional understanding, had accelerated discoveries across multiple fields. But perhaps the most profound changes were cultural. The Voidborn, who had once sought to eliminate all forms of emotional expression, had become masters of crystalline art. Their cities pulsed with living light, their structures responding to the collective emotional state of their inhabitants. They had discovered that logic and emotion weren't opposing forces, but complementary aspects of a deeper harmony. The human concept of music, a Voidborn artist demonstrated, causing the assembly chamber's walls to resonate with complex harmonies, has allowed us to express mathematical principles in ways we never imagined. Each emotion adds new dimensions to our understanding. The collaboration had led to breakthroughs in interstellar communication, as the Voidborn's crystalline technology was adapted to carry not just data, but emotional context across vast distances. Ships now navigated space using a combination of logical calculations and intuitive understanding, making faster and safer journeys than ever before. Maya watched as a group of young Voidborn, their forms already showing the fluid patterns of the new generation, interacted with human children in the assembly's garden. The children were teaching them games, seemingly chaotic activities that actually helped develop both logical thinking and emotional intelligence. The Voidborn youth, in turn, were showing the humans how to perceive the subtle harmonics that flowed through all matter. There are still challenges, Facet 9 admitted privately to Maya after the main session. Some among both our peoples resist this level of change. They fear we will lose our essential nature. Maya nodded, understanding the concern. Change doesn't mean loss, she responded, her voice carrying the precise frequencies that she knew would resonate with her friend's crystalline form. Look at yourself. You haven't lost your logical nature. You've enhanced it with emotional understanding. Just as humans haven't lost our emotions by learning to think more crystalline. The evidence of their successful integration was everywhere. Human cities now incorporated living crystal technology, creating environments that could adapt to their inhabitants' needs. Voidborn structures flowed with organic grace while maintaining their mathematical perfection. Both species had grown in ways neither could have predicted. We once thought perfection meant the elimination of variables, Facet 9 observed, its form catching the light in ways that expressed both thoughtfulness and joy. Now we understand that true perfection is the ability to incorporate all variables into a greater harmony. The prison cell where it all began had been preserved as a historical site, but not as a monument to conflict. Instead, it stood as a reminder that understanding could come from the most unexpected situations. The very frequencies Maya had discovered during her captivity were now being used to help other species bridge their own communication gaps. The universe keeps teaching us the same lesson. Maya addressed the assembly in her closing remarks. Strength lies not in rigidity, but in adaptation. Not in suppression, but in integration. The Voidborn sought to prove that emotion was a weakness, but instead discovered it was the key to their evolution. Humans feared that pure logic would make us less human, but found that it enhanced our humanity. As she spoke, the crystalline walls of the assembly pulsed with harmonious patterns, creating a visual representation of the unity between logical structure and emotional flow. The same frequencies that could have shattered a civilization had instead transformed it, creating something entirely new and wonderfully complex. The former prison complex, now known as the Convergence Institute, had become a symbol of hope throughout the galaxy. Species that had once seemed incompatible found ways to communicate and cooperate, inspired by the example of humans and Voidborn. The very diversity that had once been seen as a source of conflict was now recognized as the driving force of cosmic evolution. Maya and Facet 9 stood together at the end of the session, watching the sunset create rainbow refractions through the crystal spires of the city. We never did achieve the perfect order we sought, Facet 9 mused, its form shifting with what Maya now recognized as contentment. Perhaps, Maya replied with a smile, this is something better. A perfect harmony of imperfection. The crystal walls around them hummed in agreement, carrying their shared understanding out into the stars, where countless other species were beginning their own journeys of transformation and discovery. The universe, they had learned, was not a place of either order or chaos, but a grand symphony of both, playing out across the cosmic scales of space and time.